Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old on Old. And this week we're going to be looking at one of the most seminal and most recognizable French New Wave films of all time, Francois Truffaut's debut feature, The 400 Blows. So, if you guys are new to the series, what I do every single week is I break down a classic film that I've never seen before. I talk about its historical context and what makes it a classic, and I also look at sort of my thoughts of the movie and look at it from a 2018 viewpoint and see if it holds up. And I decided to do the 400 Blows because in a few days I'm going to be covering Francois Truffaut in my Masters of Controlled Chaos video, so stay tuned for that. And I want to talk about the 400 Blows, and I chose it for Old on Old because I hadn't seen it, and I think it's the most recognizable. The plot of the movie starts with a boy, 12-and-a-half-year-old boy named Antoine Duanel, and there really is no plot. It's sort of just his adventures and him wandering through late 50s Paris, and his relationship between his parents, his relationship between teachers, and his relationship between friends, and how he sort of views the world, and his relationship with all these different people. And for historical context, I mentioned at the top of the show, but this is the most notable French New Wave film. Just a quick backstory of the French New Wave. What it was is a 60s movement that came out of France, where in the 50s there was a bunch of French movies that there wasn't any sort of excitement to them. There was a bunch of critics, who include Jean-Luc Godard and Francois Truffaut, that thought that these movies were lackluster and they wanted to treat cinema the way they thought, which was a very serious version of it. And they went out and they started to make their own movies, and guess what? They were pretty good because they were treating cinema as an art form, and sooner or later, and pretty quickly actually, France started to accept these people, these directors, as artists, as their own vision, of the likes of great painters or great literaries or authors, and great pieces of literature almost. So there's a sort of shift in France where a lot of people actually think the birthplace of cinema is France, because this is the very first time where we see a film get treated with the kind of respect that I think a lot of people didn't give it at the time, and it wasn't pure entertainment value. There was actually some artistic merit that came with it, and these sort of French New Wave directors really embodied that. But they treated film as an art form, but they didn't do the same as what their previous predecessors did. They wanted to test the limits, so they pioneered a lot of film techniques that we still see today to create a very unique style. A lot of them borrowed from one another, but sort of the main highlights are the incredible long takes, jump cuts or unusual editing, and really pointing out socioeconomic issues with France of the time. And that's why The 400 Blows is so much of an emblematic movie of the French New Wave, because it has these long takes, also has some unusual editing styles, and it has that socioeconomic problem of the character of Antoine Duanel being juvenile and being outcast of society at such a young age because he's sort of a reckless, sort of ill-advised, sort of mischievous kind of kid. And really, you can tell through this movie, for historical context, it's Truffaut's most personal movie. Now, we know this because he said it, but also I think you can see it in the movie. Now, it's hard to say, how do you know, Connor, it's a personal movie if you don't know Francois Truffaut personally? This is because of the details that are in it. There are almost scenes that feel so detailed, they're almost like a memory for Francois Truffaut. The idea of him escaping into the cinema felt very personal. The little details that he creates of how Antoine walks down the street, or his experience of the amusement park. There's so many things that resonate with me because they feel detailed and therefore feel maybe a little more personal to Francois Truffaut. But it was a big box office success in France. It was nominated for Best Screenplay for an Oscar, which is sort of different for the time for a foreign film to do that, and really took the world by storm, because in the French New Wave, this is kind of still seen as one of the most seminal movies, and I think rightfully so. I haven't seen all French New Wave movies. This one definitely feels emblematic of what I've sort of learned from the French New Wave movies. But moving into my thoughts of the movie, what I thought was that this captures the most childlike experience. It feels almost like a personal movie to me. It feels like it captured my childhood. And it's weird saying that because Antoine Duanel is nothing like me, really. I wasn't a mischievous kid. I didn't grow up in Paris. The only connection is that we're both males. But I found that a lot of people found this way, and a lot of people felt that. And I actually liken this movie to something like Saving Private Ryan. A lot of war veterans, World War II veterans, saw Saving Private Ryan, and that said that's what it felt like to be there. Now, why does that feel right, and something like World War II stock footage, that's not right? It's because Spielberg was able to capture the feeling of World War II. Truffaut does a similar thing here. Antoine Doinel is not me as a kid, but he was able to capture the childlike wonder of this unique age, of really understanding the world in such an incredible way. You know, you think of something like the opening sequence, the title cards, where we see it's almost like a child peering through a window and sort of looking at Paris and watching the buildings go by. It captures this unique sensory experience that I think a lot of people resonate to, which comes to another point that really interests me, which is why so many people resonate with this movie. Yes, it's beautifully shot and has an incredible score, but why this character of Antoine Doinel does everyone relate to? And I think it's an outsider story, and I think a lot of people, even though they're not outsiders, think they're outsiders and think they're different. So they always relate to someone who is out of society and not necessarily in the norm. They sort of feel for him, and Antoine Doinel's relatability really allows us to sort of understand his plight and understand why, and keep us engaged throughout the entire movie. So we sort of keep engaged without necessarily a plot. But I think that sort of diminishes Antoine Doinel's incredible arc, incredible character. He is more than just a relatable character. He's a unique character because he's in a very much a transition period. He's 12 years old, and I think at this period of like 10, 11, 12, you're not quite a teenager yet, but you're not quite a kid, and you're not 5 years old where you're just questioning things. You really kind of are finally understanding what the world is and getting your grasp on it. And Antoine Doinel, in particular, doesn't feel like he's a kid anymore. He doesn't want to be a kid, but he wants to be mature, but the adults don't respect him. You know, he wants to be mature, yet he doesn't even know really what the word mature means. So he's caught in this really unique transitional period, and I think that's why it's related to a lot of people, especially if you show it to, say, a 16-year-old, or a lot of people starting to see these, maybe these movies for the first time and exploring their love of cinema. It's angsty in a sense, but I think that's the wrong term, because everyone has been a child and everyone understands that. Like all great coming-of-age movies, I don't think if I show this to a 12-year-old, they necessarily get it. You have to wait a few years and then look back on it, because I love this movie because I kept on reminiscing of, oh yeah, that's my childhood. You know, I love the phrase, everyone says, when you're a child, you want to be an adult, and when you're an adult, you want to be a child, because you always want to wish and think things were better than when maybe they weren't, or maybe they were. And the pros and cons of both. But I think Antoine Doinel is such an interesting character. And then Truffaut really explores the socioeconomic side, which I mentioned, of him being a juvenile. And I think ultimately the charm of this movie, the incredible beautifulness of this movie, is the way Truffaut just captures an experience. It's almost hard to talk about this movie because it's an experiential film. You have to experience it and understand how much it relates to just being a child and struggling and not having anyone really understand you. No one understands Antoine. I think as a child and even as a teenager, you feel misunderstood. Everyone, I think, feels misunderstood. And I think in this movie, and even Antoine is a representation of everyone is pretending like they know what they're doing, even though they don't know anything. And I think once you kind of realize that, you can understand the film, you can understand life a little better, really. And ultimately, I found that this movie was a very special movie. It's one of the few old movies that I watched a second time because I kept thinking about it. It was an incredible experience. I don't think I'm going to forget the first time I watched this movie. I'm so glad I saw this for the series. One of my favorite old movies. I highly recommend this movie, even though it's black and white, even though it's 1959, even though it's a foreign film. Check this one out. It's a really great movie, and maybe as I explore more of French New Wave films, they won't be my favorite anymore. I'm not even sure if it is my favorite, but it was an incredible experience, and one that I would love to go back, and I'm being nostalgic again, go back and watch again, even though it was only a couple weeks ago now. But anyways, guys, make sure you like the video. Comment below. Let me know some of your favorite French New Wave films, or if you want me to cover more French New Wave films on Old. Any comments will really help. Stay tuned for the next couple of days when I have the Masters of Controlled Chaos for Francois Truffaut. That will be a lot of fun. And until next time, stay tuned.